Hello and welcome, I'm Kara the Scrivener, and today we're going to be doing a nonfiction vlog of November. I'm really excited for this. I'm going to be reading 3 books in this vlog. I'm going to be reading Henry David Thoreau's Walden. I'm going to be reading We Are Not Broken by Eric Garcia, and I'm going to be reading 84 Charing Cross Road by Helene, Hanff. And I am going to give my thoughts throughout this. This is just a little jump in at the beginning. Nonfiction November is to highlight nonfiction books in a month of the year. And I'm here to do a reading vlog of We Are Not Broken, Changing the Conversation on Autism by Eric Garcia. So this is a book that came out in 2021 that I have been wanting to read for a while, and I'm really glad that I sat down and read it because I'm about 33% through the audiobook and I have so many thoughts. Like, I literally had to stop and take a breather and think about it because it is such a well done book. It is tiniest bit of memoir because he is basing himself out of his own experiences. He is a man who has autism, which I love. I think that so often people with disabilities have been taken out of the narrative, and he talks a lot about that, how, you know, for a long time it was in the researchers kind of doctorate kind of thing, so parents took it back by taking their own voices and making them central. But the thing is that so often that became something around curing and fixing, and this idea of disease, which becomes really insidious really quickly and very cruel to children who actually have autism. So I love that he took the center stage with telling the story, and he is a man who is a reporter, he's a journalist, and he loves politics. So there's definitely an element of politics in here because of the fact that he primarily works as a reporter for, I want to call it Parliament Hill, the White House, whatever the American thing is called. I'm Canadian, who knows? And this is a very American central book, which is a thing that kind of I never love, but I understand in many ways why it has to be that, especially if you're looking at policy and stuff, because policy is very different. Although I would love an international view of the different kind of politics. He really highlights the fact that he stands out of the normal because so often people view people with autism as only children and only white people and middle class. And as a Latino man who grew up in the 1990s, he saw the shift away from that. He also talks about how a lot of the times women are completely excluded from the narrative as people who can have disabilities, and him as a man feels like sometimes people treat it as if only children can have it. And he really highlights the fact that autism affects you throughout your life. There isn't really a lot of specifics about people who are adults with autism because it's not studied, and also that a lot of people were underdiagnosed during his era and especially before that, so that we don't have a large database of people. He also looked at funding in the United States and how only a very small part of it goes to actually helping people with autism live their lives, and most of it is going to understanding the cause and trying to prevent it, which is just a really flawed way of looking at it. He talked about the social model of disability, which I love. I've been trying to describe this for a really long time and I didn't know the proper words for it, but it's the idea that often the people who have disabilities are mostly affected not by the disability themselves, but by the way people respond to it. The disability has its challenges. It has things that make life sometimes very hard to live, but the social response to that and the stigma and the ways in which people refuse to accommodate and the treatment of that really accelerates the problem in a way that the disability doesn't. And as someone who has a physical disability, I can really look at the ways that that has affected me. And the part that I stopped was him talking about jobs. It became I felt my entire body just panic kind of go whew, because he was talking about the ways in which value and productivity is linked and how people who cannot get employment are just viewed as really terrible. And it just really struck me as someone who has gone through the process of applying for jobs. I have offered to work for free for people on a probational thing, and I've been refused for jobs I am more than qualified, and I have training and I have experience and all these things, and they will just not take me. I'm also a person who has learning disabilities, so I've experienced some of the ways in that. I have dyslexia and a speech impediment. I did not speak until age 4, and then I did not read until age 10. Normally when I talk about dyslexia, I say anywhere from 9 to 11, because 9 was probably when I first started grasping the understanding of words, and by 11 I was starting to read. It was really 14 when I started to read at enough of a level to go to school, and I would say it was about 16, 17 by the time I was actually writing at the equivalency of my peers. So it took me a really long time, and I was completely unable to understand. I'm very thankful to have a mother who was trained as an educator and spent years and years trying every single thing to teach me, and eventually when I was 9 figured out the idea that because I could quote large amounts of segments of things back to her, that memory would be a good understanding. So she just did sight memorization where I looked and memorized words and quoted things back. Like I have never learned how to spell a word in my life because I have phonetic dyslexia, which means like I just cannot understand the ways that words like work together and like vowels and all of those things. I just don't understand. So sometimes I just forget to spell words. This is a problem that still like affects me greatly. Like I was trying to think of the word another the other day, where I was trying to remember like if it was like another or like needed to be separated if there was a different word, and like sometimes I just struggle. Like necessary also, I want to put the s's first and I just like spell it wrong every time. I still pronounce words quite wrong often, and I'm very good at like going around and like making sure that I miss those words. Like one of the words is wrong, which is like incorrect. I cannot for the life of me say it properly with like the w and G in the right place. And another one is the word this. You wouldn't notice it a lot of times because I use it in sentences and it's like able to be like, you know, masqueraded as a word that I can pronounce. But man, having nephews and like babysitting or like working with children is exhausting because I get asked by children all the time, why don't you say that word correctly? And just the trauma response is huge. It's just like a lot of like trauma that I know lives in my body from the way that I was picked on, the way that I was asked to repeat things and made fun of, like when I gave presentations in high school and people would actively laugh at me when I was trying to present. And I was just so exhausted and frustrated at that. And like the ways in which, yeah, I still have so much shame about like my intelligence and about my capabilities and my ability to do things. And like, I think that those things affect me so much more than like my actual inability to do things. Because I can normally find solutions. My friends who don't ask how I say things wrong or like don't correct me or like do so in a really nice way when I go, I can't remember how to spell this word, and they go, oh, here it is. And it's like so helpful. And it's just like things like that that are just really helpful to understand. I really love the idea of social model of disability because it really is in many ways the fault of society that people with disability have such hard time, and it also affects all of them. I believe that we as a society are interconnected. When one people fail, a whole part of us fails. Because we don't actually properly accommodate and help and assist people, we have whole demographics that cannot live up to the dreams, and you have suicidality and mental health, you have all of these things that counteract. And I just believe so strongly that like people should be given accommodations. And like for me, like for instance, with someone who deals with chronic pain and really, really struggles to like have consistency because of the fact that I cannot know ahead of time whether I'll be able to leave the house that day. I know that I can't work 5 days in a row. I need rest. I need to take care of myself. Otherwise, like my whole everything stops working, and I have like such huge flares that I can't do anything and I'm completely immobilized. And then the social level of that as well, where you have that fear of people asking you, what do you do? Like what degree you have, all of these things where like, because my health has blocked me from working, there's just like all of those fear around that. I know lots of people who have autism or other mental health or physical disabilities that prevent them from working or have limited capacity, and the shame often even in their families and things like that of like explaining those things, and those things should not exist. And I think that so much of that level is there. And yeah, I really am enjoying this book. I'm really enjoying the way that he talks about things, the way that he interviews other people. I just think it's a really lovely book. I'm really excited to continue on. I will jump in another time talking about it as well. But yes, currently I am 33% of the way through and loving it. We are a little bit later and I have finished We Are Not Broken. I don't think I have as many thoughts at the end as I thought that I might have. I think that it's just like, it's a really well done story that tells the variety of different areas. I think one of the chapters that hit me the most was when he talked about a Black man being shot as a therapist when he was trying to like protect and care for a man who was a Latino autistic man in the street who wasn't responding to police. I think that it really highlights some of the issues with policing and the issues of viewing everyone as a perpetrator and of violence and all of these things, especially to do with race, and how, yeah, these two men, one of them was obviously having a hard time and one of them was trying to help them. And they were viewed as people that were perpetrators and violent and going to cause aggression because of the color of their skin. And part of that talks about a little bit about the aftermath of that, but the sadness is that case, though the police officer who shot him originally got convicted, his conviction got overturned on a technicality just a few months ago. I think that overall it is a good book that talks about autism, that talks about the need for better understanding and for own voices conversations. It talks a lot about like sex and relationships and about gender and about all of those things that are misunderstood and like not talked about, and how our perception of it is very limiting to the people who are stereotyped that way, both who fit outside of that stereotype and the people that do fit into that stereotype, but are like very wrongly represented. And I think that it's a really necessary book for people to read. From there, I was in a nonfiction mood, so I moved to 84 Charing Cross Road by Helene Hanff. And this is a really fun book. I had heard about it over the years and I was like, yes, I need some warmth in my heart. And this is about an American writer, playwright, screenwriter. She had many dreams and she was never particularly successful. I'll actually link a video that I found by Book Olive, which was such an interesting video and like deep dive into who Helene Hanff was throughout her life. It's a deep dive and like look at various of her books. I had not found her channel before, so it was super fun to like look into things and like be so impressed by the deep diveness of it. So yeah, she was a woman who had grown up and then she moved to New York as a young woman and spent the rest of her life there, despite the fact that she was never particularly successful. Her plays never got produced and they're now lost. And her work, though became somewhat successful with 84 Charing Cross Road, never gave her enough income to actually be sustainable. She actually died without much money and on aid from the government. So I think that that understanding of what it means to be a writer and how someone can be incredibly talented and gifted and all of those things and to not actually be able to be lasting in our memories is a really interesting conversation. The background of this is that because she was forced to leave school because her scholarship fund ended and she was no longer going to receive scholarship and she was growing up in the Great Depression, she ended up becoming self-taught and she really liked English literature books. So she found in a weekly review this small out-of-print bookshop in London and she wrote to them and asked them to send her books. And she's kind of snarky and she's giving personal tales and like, just being like me and my, old things in my old apartment and stuff like that. And yeah, she writes to them and she's, they're kind of formal to her and she's always kind of sassing them a little bit to like be less formal. And that's a little bit of my personality. Sometimes when I'm in formal situations, I'll like be a little sassy and be like, no, we can be friends. She never gets to London during the time in which the story takes place. It is all of the letters that she wrote and all of the letters that they wrote back over 20 years. From 1949 until 1969. And the wonderful thing is that because of the fact that they're currently unrationed and they're very low on supplies, she sends them gifts of eggs and of meat and of all of these things. She writes not only to the bookstore and the bookseller, she also writes to the bookseller's wife, she writes to the various people, she writes to like an elderly neighbor at one point. She's just like really lovely and very friendly and wants to be friends with everyone. And it is actually like really emotional as it goes on, and she's kind of asking like, have you heard about these people for a long time? Because like, they were clerks at one point and they moved on and they got married. And like one of the girls early on is referenced as being 12 years old, and then at one point she's referenced to be 24, and I immediately just started crying. And it's just like one of those moments when you're like, oh man, and time has gone on, and especially as it goes on and like we see these characters go throughout their lives. And yeah, it just brought me really emotional about how much people can impact them, and also joys of people coming and leaving in our relationships, that like you see the fact that time chugs on, and that doesn't mean that like things aren't important because they're over or because they're temporary or all of these things. And there's some really touching letters at the end as the bookshop is closing and some other things have happened. It's a testimony to the impact people can make, and especially these people who never physically met each other and the impact of that. And it's just really beautiful to see. So I really loved this story, and yeah, I'm really excited to read her other books because she actually does eventually go to London on the profits that come from this book, and she actually gets to meet some of the people, and the store has already shut down, but she goes to the place that has not been completely remodeled yet for the new place and sees it. And I just have chills. It makes me so happy. And then the last book that I'm not quite done is Walden by Henry David Thoreau. I really, really love his book, Civil Disobedience, which I think is such a beautiful anti-slavery book that I really, really enjoy. And this book, I have more thoughts on. It is very nature, and it's very on the idea of self-reliance, which is something that his mentor, Ralph Waldo Emerson, really like elevated and thought about, and it's just very anti who I am. I'm very collectivism, very like social responsibility, and very lack of like individualism and self-reliance. But I do think that the nature stuff and some of the beauty of the fact that he talks about how there is work not just with your hands but with your head and stuff. But yeah, I am kind of struggling to get to the end of it. So I finished Walden and I don't have a lot of thoughts other than it kind of nosedived more to me. I think that like it's just politically so different than me. Like the idea of libertarianism and like self-reliance and like, you know, it's so much focus on like this is what I can do with my like legs and my arms, and like I can build things and I can be self-sufficient. And I just believe so much in collectivism and in caring for one another and in the idea that like when we choose to be self-reliant and independent, first of all, it's false. No one is an island. No one is a Walden by themselves. Like he's even like living on someone else's land. So he's not even a Walden. But like, yeah, you have this idea of this. And like, what happens when you need help? What happens when others who need help, like, especially, you know, having this in the same vlog as We Are Not Broken, like where we talk about people with support needs and stuff like that. It's just like, it's so absurd to me, the idea of isolation and self-reliance as key. Even in 84 Charing Cross Road, we see this idea that there's loneliness and this need and desire for connection and for like the goodness of humanity. And even someone like Helene, who's not a wealthy woman, who chooses to send out meat and eggs and things like that so someone can have joy. Like there's so much beauty in choosing to be kind to one another, in choosing to be self-giving and to choose the better of society, the better of the weak over the better of the strong, and all of those things that I just believe so intrinsically in my soul that, you know, I don't object to every aesthetic reason of him. I understand like the desire to do things on your own, to, you know, love nature and to seek all of these things for simplicity. These are not bad ideas, but I think that they're coded in this language of the idea and almost fantasy for a lot of people, especially in today's world, 200 years almost past, where you have this desire to have this like life in the woods, of this simplicity and all of these things, where in many ways it's missing the point that you are going to not actually be self-reliant. And also, in choosing to believe that you can be self-reliant, you also often believe that other people should be self-reliant even when they cannot be. So with all of that saying, I want to read the beginning of this book, which I thought was very funny, and that was a highlight for me. In most books, the I or first person is omitted. In this, it will be retained, that in respect to egotism is the main difference. We commonly do not remember that it is, after all, always the first person that is speaking. And I think that that part is very clever. And he also acknowledges that this is a first person account, that you cannot separate the person from the voice, that the author in many ways is never dead, which is another belief that I have that is sometimes controversial. I am very mixed because I think that some of it is funny, that it's, you know, just an account of his life and stuff, and all of those things. But at the same time, I do think that it propels this idea of this fantasy of self-independence that is often corrupted in really terrible ways. And this book is not trying to say that. This is a man who campaigned against slavery, who, you know, chose to stand up for what was right. There's some debate about whether he is actually anti-slavery because of the belief that black and white people stand on equal ground, or because of the fact that he just believes that, you know, everyone should be able to defy the government, which, you know, I would rather the idea that like because of an innate worth of people, but that is much more of a like social idea of something rather than a freedom and libertarian kind of view. And yeah, this just became very political all the way through. I started with a book that talked about politics, and I ended with a book that talks about politics. So alas, here we are, talking about politics in Nonfiction November. Who would have guessed? I hope that you read books you liked as well. If you read any nonfiction you would like to recommend to me, I would love to hear it, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.